absence of a member or when a member abstains for conflict of interest. Present tonight are members Joe Kraus, Rob DeLocke, and Kelly Sauber. And we have alternate Ben Lockman, who will be a voting member tonight, serving as a member in the absence of Lisa Carson, our chair, who can't be here tonight. I am Kay Towsley, the acting chair for the meeting tonight. And also present is zoning administrator David Riggs. At this time, I invite you to view a pre-recorded video on the rules and procedures of the board.
The Athens Board of Zoning Appeals operates according to the following procedure. The chair will name and describe the case. The zoning administrator or secretary will state the basis of the objection and any applicable facts or conditions pertaining to the case. The appellant or their representative will give reason why the appeal should be viewed favorably. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the request will be heard. Anyone wishing to speak in general comment will be heard. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition will be heard. If necessary, the appellant or their representative will offer concluding, summary, or rebuttal remarks. Testimony from the floor shall be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. According to Athens City Code, Section 23.07.03b, the board has power to grant variances from the strict application of the code, provided the variance will not be contrary to the public interest, the spirit of the code is observed, public safety and welfare are secured, and substantial justice is done. According to Athens City Code, Section 23.07.10c, variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of fact based directly on the particular evidence presented to it, that the standards and conditions imposed in this title, if applicable, have been met by the applicant. Exceptional circumstances. There are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question or to the intended use of the property that do not apply generally to other properties or classes or uses in the same zone. Practical difficulty and undue hardship. Because of exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions pertaining to a specific piece of property, a literal enforcement of these regulations will result in practical difficulty or undue hardship that is unnecessary to the achievement of public purposes. Preservation of equal property rights. Literal interpretation of these regulations would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same zone and the same vicinity, while a granting of the requested variance will not confer on the applicant any special privilege that is denied to other properties in the same zone and the same vicinity. Minimum variance. The variance granted is the minimum variance required to make possible the reasonable use of the property. Absence of detriment. The authorizing of such variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property and will not materially impair the purpose of the zoning code or the public interest. Not of a general nature. The condition or situation of the specific piece of property or the intended use of said property for which variance is sought, one or the other or in combination, is not of so general or recurrent a nature as to make reasonably practicable the formulation of a general regulation for such condition or situation. Any person, resident, or officer, department, or appointed body of the City of Athens, aggrieved by a decision of the board, may petition the Athens County Court of Common Pleas concerning the illegality of the decision. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the decision of the board to the applicant. Thank you.
For the property at 70 West State Street. And the appellant, who is not present, has indicated that he would like us to review and decide on the case without his testimony. I believe that's correct, Mr. Riggs. Have you received?
Yes.
Okay. So according to our rules of procedure, Article 6, hearing of cases, we can choose either to hear the case tonight using only the documents he has provided us, or we can choose to continue the case as we did last month until such time as he can be present. My personal feeling is that if he's okay with it, he's given us an abundance of, or enough documents, I think, for us to make a reasoned decision without his being here. I would vote that we go ahead and hear the case tonight, but we can discuss it further before we take the vote, if anyone wants to say anything. Or
Yeah, I have just a little bit of reservation, but in that the process seems to be, we should have an appellant here. It seems a little weird, right? But it's within the rules to do this. And again, like you mentioned, Kay, we have enough information, I think. It's not necessarily a controversial request. So I would actually, do we need to make a motion to move ahead with this? So I'd make a motion to move ahead with this variance request and review it tonight and make a decision.
I'll second it that we move forward with case 21-13 we go forward without the appellant present.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, it passes 5-0. We will proceed without the appellant present. So the one case before us, we've said, is case 2113V for the property at 70 West State Street in Zone R3. Brian Wharton of Wharton Properties is the appellant. The appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23-1001, Table A, Schedule of Bulk Controls, to allow a front setback of 6 feet where 25 feet is required, and to allow a 47% building coverage where 30% is the maximum allowance. Mr. Riggs, do you have anything to add to what we already know about the case?
Yeah, so the appellant, as you know, is requesting to put a front porch on this property at 70 West State Street. And to do that, to make the porch the size that he wants, he's gonna be into the front setback, and he will exceed the maximum allowed lot coverage for this property.
Any questions for Mr. Riggs?
Yeah, so the current setback on the house is not much more than 6 feet, probably. Do you know what that number is, by any chance?
The current setback?
Yeah.
It should be in your documents there, but I think it's like 6 or 7 feet.
I think it was, the porch is 8 feet, and the setback after the porch is added is 6 feet.
Yes, it's 6 feet, yes.
So,
14 feet
yeah.
presently.
Is it 14?
14.
Must have been,
Yeah.
just by doing the math, yeah.
And walking by, I would say that leaves 2 feet-ish prior to the distance from the sidewalk as is, which is not abnormal for that neighborhood.
Right.
But I will say that some of the photos that were supplied were providing photos of porches that received variance for setback and then were built into rooms later, and part of the actual physical structure of the building, interior, to add potentially up to 2 rooms with this porch on this space. And how, being new to this board, how is that addressed or concerned? And Dave, kind of, Mr. Riggs, I just started kind of asking a little bit about that, because that's, is this that slope? Because I've noticed that the buildings that do have that very tight setback that are turned into another room on their structure are not beautiful, and they're not providing a wonderful advantage for community on the front porch.
So once the board approves the setback for the porch, if they were to request to enclose the porch in the future, they would come to the code office, and since that setback has already been set, they would not need to come back to the board if they wanted to enclose that porch and make it an interior room rather than an exterior.
So that, and point in case would be a couple of the photos that were supplied by Brian Wharton himself, specifically, well, I can't say specifically. I will pan through the photos and and bring up an instance specifically at Congress and State Street, I believe, is one example. But That would be the only thing that makes me leery about this. Personally, I totally understand why he would want a porch on that house, and I agree. I think it would be good for the community. I think it would be aesthetically more pleasing than it is without a porch.
Yeah, well, let's talk about all that more as we get into the findings. In terms of the general concern that there might be an enclosure down the road without our knowing it, could we craft the variance request to limit it to an unenclosed addition, or do we need his permission to do that?
No, I believe you could make that exception, that it has to remain open porch.
Okay, so we can discuss that as
Okay.
we get a little bit further.
At this point, we're accepting that it's a single-story porch.
Yeah, that was
With an
my
overhang?
question. Is it a single story?
I believe it is, yes.
With an overhang?
Yes.
Okay. And the overhang's going to extend beyond that 8 feet of porch, so it's even going to, the overhang might even be over the sidewalk almost at that point. Which was the case that was dealing with the folks that were here last meeting. They had 2 feet overhang.
Right.
The porch was fine, the overhang was extending into the variance location.
The overhang usually counts against,
Yes, it
Right.
does. So it should be,
It should be
including
6
the
feet
soffit
width.
and everything, that should be the maximum distance that they're allowed to
Okay.
go.
Gotcha.
So you'd be looking down from basically looking down from the top.
Right.
And whatever that coverage is, even though it's not that far on the ground, it would be whatever the roof coverage is.
Right.
And Kelly, I believe that property from the pictures already has its second floor overhangs its first floor.
It is, it's an offset, it does have.
So that would provide a larger porch area without having to create more overhang.
Right, and they do have that bay window on the front as
Yeah.
well, right, which will kick into that same porch space and diminish it just a bit.
I think my main question was around minimum variance, and several of the.
Can we wait till?
Yeah, sure.
Only
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that's,
yeah.
I
We're
love
new
that
to
it's
this,
actually
sorry.
one of the
Yeah.
conditions. Okay, so we're going to get to that in a
Yeah,
minute.
for sure.
All right. Since the appellant is not present, I think we need someone to read his narrative into the record, sort of as his statement that we're considering. And I have a copy here if somebody would like to do that.
I can do that,
You have it?
Oh,
Okay.
you don't want- thank you.
as long as I don't choke here. Okay, so this is the appellant Brian Wharton's 70 West State requested variance notes. Bullet 1, virtually every surrounding property in both directions and on both sides of the street have front porches. And he's provided pictures he references here. Some are former porches that have been enclosed, but literally every house has one. By adding a front porch such as the one that is on 50 West, not obviously as big, the house would be more in keeping with the neighborhood and Athens in general. It would also give a much nicer appearance from the street. Bullet 3, not having a front porch doesn't allow the residents to enjoy the outside as all their neighbors can on a front porch. Bullet 4, most neighboring properties have porches while the house structure is covering much more lot square footage than 70 West State Street. You can see this on the auditor's website, so he's referring to the property boundaries and such. Brian Wharton, 82 North Court Street, Athens, Ohio, 45701.
Very good, thank you. And Mr. Riggs, I think that's all we're required to
Correct,
do
yes.
on his behalf. Okay, so since there's no public here to speak to the variance request, we can go ahead and actually consider the 6 findings that we have to consider. The first one being exceptional circumstances. Are there exceptional circumstances applying to the property or its intended use that do not in general apply to properties in the same zone? And I would argue that absolutely yes. It's a very small lot, not much more than half at 3,325 square feet, not much more than half of the 6,000 square feet that code requires for an R3 property. When you get a little piece of property that small, it makes it much harder to be able to put into that lot sort of basic amenities that other owners enjoy, garages, or in this case, the front porch. So I think that is the exceptional circumstance, and I think I've described as well the second finding, what the difficulty and hardship is, that you can't enjoy something that most other property owners with a code-approved lot size can enjoy. Others of you may have other thoughts as well.
I think on that front, from my perspective, many houses in Athens in R3 have porches. Many houses do not have porches. And from that perspective, this is not exceptional.
By exceptional, I think we're looking at something about the topography of the lot. Sometimes they're very steep, or they're drainage issues,
Or the
things-
size of the lot, like you said.
or the lot size that would create a hardship.
Or potentially the location of the house on the lot, because looking at the back portion of the lot, there's plenty of room to put a nice large patio out back. Just saying, that is,
That's why we're here.
right? But the aesthetics of the front porch versus the back porch and bringing community into the spirit of the neighborhood supersedes that in some respects.
All right, so it's kind of a complex issue.
Right. It is a complex issue, but
Rob, did you want to say something?
Well, I would think I was going to agree with your assessment, really. I think that it is a situation that warrants an exception here because of the terrain, the position of the house, the size of the lot. All those things are factors, I think, that are important here.
Okay, so we'll think our own thoughts and vote as we choose to. Joe, did you want to say something?
No, that's fine.
Okay. All right, so I think we've covered difficulty and hardship as well. Preservation of equal rights is the next finding to consider. Would denying the variance deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity? And on the other hand, would granting the variance convey special privileges to the appellant denied to others in the same vicinity?
My question here is 50 West State was used as an example in the application materials.
Okay,
Was that a variance request at the time?
Mr. Riggs?
Those are always tough questions.
I do not know the answer to that. I'd have to research that.
Yeah.
It might have been grandfathered in. A lot of these properties were
It's-
grandfathered in
it's
as
a-
they mostly look currently.
It's a new ad porch since 2019 on 50 West 8. If you look at 2019 Google Street View, it doesn't have a porch, but now it does.
Oh, so,
In that case, that would have been, we would have had gone to the BZA for a variance on that.
I don't remember that, but
It is a very similar,
that's,
it's in the same area and is quite close to the street.
that's Wharton Properties. They own it now. Did they own it then? I don't know.
I assume so.
I would say it's only 2 years, so most likely.
yeah, and in any event, we saw the numerous photos of other properties, virtually every one of which, except for this one, has the front porch, most of which were not enclosed, but some were.
Yeah, I think if you walk up the street, you don't have to go far to start seeing where there's way less than 25-foot setbacks. Probably all these houses are less than 25 foot. Some of them are, the closer ones are probably a little more than 6, but still they're not much more. If you go up the street further, there's 3 at the top of the hill before the cemetery. They're like almost 0 setback.
Like 100 and 102, the ones right before the cemetery. Those, I was taking particular note of those as well. I do have a question for Mr. Riggs, and the question is, try to explain to me, because I'm confused on where the setback starts and ends. So a 6-foot setback is measured from curb Is
No.
that setback from the center?
So
of
we
the
always
street?
talk about the setbacks from the public right-of-way, and that's either a dedicated right-of-way or a prescriptive easement. In some area, I don't want to get too complicated here, in some areas, you'll have a property owner that owns to the center of the road, but the prescriptive easement takes back, let's say, 25 feet from that. That would be where the setback would start.
Okay.
It would be from the right-of-way, whether it's the dedicated right-of-way or the prescriptive easement.
Do we know what this one is?
Yeah, it's a dedicated right-of-way, and it would be probably just behind the sidewalk,
Okay. Just behind, meaning on the street side of the
on the
sidewalk?
street side, yes.
Yeah, I'm looking at the county's auditor's data, which is the property boundaries.
It's showing
and-
just
That's
on
the
the
great
street
way to look
side
at
of
it.
the
Yeah, so
sidewalk?
that
Okay.
line is,
Okay.
you can see it's just on the other side, about a foot maybe of the sidewalk or less.
Right. So we're going to limit that
This,
down to...
and this is approximate, it's not a surveyed probably here, but that's probably a good
Right. So being down
estimation
to
of where it
6
should be.
feet will actually give more than a lot of those properties on West State Street,
I think so.
Think so.
technically.
So,
I mean,
yeah, so that's where I think this is not granting any special rights that others are already
I'm going to agree with you on
benefiting
that.
from.
Right. Right.
So, just a question, since I'm new. There are a handful of properties in the area that don't have porches. Would this confer a likelihood of granting porches to all of those properties in the future, or no?
We take each case by itself. I mean, we do pay attention to precedent to some extent, but really each case has its own particularities. So it doesn't guarantee that we must do this.
Right.
henceforth.
I think there's a section in the about general, like a general
General
variance. That isn't, we're not setting precedent necessarily.
No,
Okay.
No, in this one.
no, not in
Okay.
in this case.
Thanks.
Good question.
Yeah, I think I did note like the kind of let's see, it was 79 West State Street doesn't have a porch. 84 has a very small porch. 10 North Lancaster, right around the corner, doesn't have a porch. 36 West State, just down the street, doesn't have a porch as well. So I think it's at least somewhat mixed. And the porches that are there, I think, are a mix of new additions and original builds.
Yeah, when we consider this, we also look at how many people have bothered to come and express displeasure, who happen to be in the neighborhood, and that's a good indication that there's some special privilege at stake. So,
Yeah, if people did show up and complained about this, then that would be an indication that, there's something you need to take into consideration.
yeah.
Does that tend to happen in rental neighborhoods?
Probably not as much, unless it's adjacent property owner is another landowner that, landlord that feels that this shouldn't be granted because he didn't get his or something, who knows. But they probably tend to be sort of, camaraderie, there's some camaraderie probably with them to some extent. It does shouldn't happen more if there's residential issues, yeah, certainly.
Okay, moving on to minimum variance. Is the requested variance the minimum required to make possible the reasonable use of the property?
And 25 to 6 feet sounds like a lot. It doesn't sound minimum, but I think if you take into consideration that it's, 14 potentially, and it doesn't look like it's even that much, that the actual change is not great. If you look at the stoop, which is supposedly included in the setback, right? It looks
It
like
should
there's
be,
only
yes.
5 or 6 feet now. I'm looking at the image here, but it doesn't look like there's much. That's probably 5 or 6 feet now.
Yeah, and just thinking of the porch size, it's not a huge porch.
Well, if that's only 5 or 6 feet,
Then
they're
the
talking
porch
about
is
an 8-foot porch.
The
Well,
porch is
but an 8-foot overhang potentially with
from
a
the
6-foot
back-
porch.
From the wall here, though, right?
Right.
So it's set back a little bit. because
So
of-
we're going to be pretty close to the sidewalk. It will stick out further than the corner shop
A
there.
little maybe, yeah. So I
But-
think it's a reasonable request for this variance. It's not going from 25 to 6 feet, it's really going from 14 or something to 6, or it looks like less than that, so maybe 8 to 6 or 10 to 6, but, so I think it is a minimum variance.
Okay.
But anyone else can weigh in on that.
Well, I guess when we get to the final vote, we'll sort of
Yeah, well,
factor in all those things.
if we're 8 feet with the overhang, that means the porch is 6 feet, so it's not a ginormous porch.
Right.
Well, I think it's 8 feet, including the overhang, because that's already included.
Right, so the actual walking area was probably only going to be 6 feet addition. If you have a 2-foot overhang on the
Oh,
roofing.
I see what you mean, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
As long as we're reading it that way.
Well, absence of detriment. Will granting the variance be of substantial detriment to adjacent properties or impair the purpose of the zoning code?
Well, it won't impede the right-of-way or the sidewalk, and none of the other property owners have come to complain about this, so I don't see any detriment here.
And there are other properties right next door or nearby that are as close to the sidewalk as well, on that same block, on the same side of the street even.
All right, and lastly, not of a general nature. Is the requested variance of such a general nature or recurring nature that the situation would be more reasonably handled by changing the law?
No.
No. That one we usually say. No, we don't have many such porch requests come. Okay, I guess we need to reframe the variance request, perhaps. Let's discuss that a little bit more. Going back to what
So,
Kelly was saying about,
Single story, no enclosure perspective, I mean,
are we all?
but then
good with that?
definition of enclosure, what if he screens it in for screens? And then it
Yeah, what
becomes
is the
windows, and then.
Definition of enclosure, I guess.
It's just crazy,
I
yeah.
thought of that as well.
I know.
What defines being enclosed? Is it
Right.
impervious surface, so glass, or
Right.
what's your feeling for that, Mr. Riggs?
I would say if you say it can't be enclosed, that would include screening or glass, so you would not be able to do that.
I'd be disappointed if I couldn't screen in my porch. I'm just saying.
Well, you're
if-
not the appellant.
Right, I understand, but if I were wishing to screen in my porch and I had a variance for a
Well,
porch.
maybe they could come back.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Would someone like to make a motion with those adjustments?
You know the verbiage?
Sort of. Should I make a go of this?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So I make a motion to, how do I say this? I did this last time, I
Oh,
did it fine.
just to grant a variance.
To adopt,
To grant a variance.
to grant a
the property.
variance to the appellant at 28.
To the property.
To the property at 70. Why am I not
West
seeing that
State.
here? West State Street. There we go, 70 West State Street. The appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.10.01, Table A, Schedule of Bolt Controls, to allow a front setback of 6 feet, where 25 feet is required, and a 47% building lot coverage, where 30% is a maximum allowance. And also a stipulation on this granting of variance that would include that the porch not be enclosed and only be 1 story high.
Very good, thank you. Are we ready to vote?
Sure. Do I
All
need a
right,
second on that first?
Oh, yes, second.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. All right, looks like it passes 5-0. And the variance is granted. We do have one other bit of business, which is to approve last month's minutes from October. I think we all were present, and so there's enough of us to do that. Would someone please make a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
I don't know how,
So
but
moved. Say so
I'm
moved.
fine with that. Yes, I
So moved.
I make a motion to
Does
approve those
anyone
minutes.
second it?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor, raise your hand. All right, that passes. Any other business from anyone?
No,
I think we're all
good.
set then. Thank you all. 7:35.